Welcome to the latest edition of Coliseum Chronicles, your USC show, one of your two USC shows here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek of Trojans Wire, along with Ethan Inman, new co-host. Mark Rogers unavailable tonight, but hey, we can pilot this ship. We're men of Troy. We know what to do. We're self-sufficient here. And so as we get into spring portal season, Ethan Inman, that's the hot topic right now. That's the main story. And USC adding Kennedy Urlacher and Tamir Robinson. So two high-end additions, both from Midwestern programs. USC's going up against Midwestern teams in the Big Ten, but also Penn State and Notre Dame. They both met in the college football playoff semifinals. Notre Dame went to the college football playoff national championship game. So these are high-end additions. These are significant portal pieces. These are not leftovers. This is not USC men's basketball. No, USC is getting these choice cuts for the football team on the roster. So, Ethan, your initial reaction to these two portal additions for USC?
Yeah, I feel similarly to you. I'm really excited, Matt. I think, Tamir Robinson, he's a linebacker from Penn State, 6'3", 232. So he's a big guy. And he's had a lot of action at Penn State. It's not like he didn't play in any games. He played in 14 of their games. The stats don't really jump out at you. He only had 11 tackles and a tackle and a half for loss and half a sack. But like you mentioned, he developed in a bigger program and he got into some games, even if he wasn't making a lot of starts and playing every single down. So, and back when he was coming out of high school, he was the number 2 player in Pennsylvania. So, and he comes with 3 years of eligibility left, so he can develop under the staff for several years. And then, Kennedy Urlacher, it's always exciting when you can get someone who's the son of an NFL legend. He's Brian Urlacher's son, obviously. And he, very similar stat line to Tamir Robinson, actually got into 14 games but didn't start any of them. 12 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 pass breakup. Also has 3 years of eligibility left. So these are 2 guys who have the physical tools, like you said, have a little bit of development at some of these bigger programs, but also have a lot of time to develop under the USC coaching staff. So I think it's a big get. And these are obviously 2 position groups that USC was in need at. I mentioned on the podcast last week that linebacker was definitely one of the positions that I felt USC was going to target. So seeing them attacking that early, I don't think that they're done. I think that they'll probably add another linebacker before the portal closes. But just seeing them attack the secondary. They were thin at safety as well. So seeing them get Urlacher is also great. I think it's 2 great adds, and I think that they're guys who, even if they're not starters this year, they'll definitely make an impact.
Now, what would you say to the point that, both teams played USC last season, and so they're going to come up with, a readily available and established knowledge base. Like they could see directly on the field what D'Anton Lynn was trying to do. Like they got an up close look at what USC was doing. That would seem to accelerate the teaching process, the learning curve. These are not situations where D'Anton Lynn and Rob Ryan and Doug Belk are going to be starting from ground zero. They're going to get guys who have already been coached up to a considerable degree. And of course, so at Penn State, Tamir Robinson had Tom Allen, a fine defensive coordinator who's now relocated to Clemson. And of course, Notre Dame, had an elite defense. We saw what Notre Dame did to Georgia under Al Golden in the Sugar Bowl. Before then beating Penn State, getting to the national title game. So I'm thinking, Ethan, and I want to get your thoughts on this, that these guys, they're not going to be projects in the sense of like they're blank slates and they have to be coached up from the bottom. No, these guys already have a substantial football IQ and are going to know what to do and how to apply it.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. And I think that, the same way that they got to see USC on the field and see guys like Kamari Ramsey and Achille Arnold and the other guys that had success last year having success in this defense, I think that USC also got to look at them. So, from a coach's perspective, especially if there was film on them before the game, and they can go back to that mindset where they were like, hey, here's, when we were scouting you, what we thought that you did well, and here's some weaknesses that we thought that you had that we tried to attack. And so that gives them a bit of a knowledge basis for how to continue developing them as well. So I think that you're right there, and I think that it goes both ways for sure.
So got a safety, got a linebacker. I think we all know what's still needed in the cupboard, where USC needs to stock up, and that's offensive line. And so what are your thoughts on either, what USC can really realistically expect on offensive line, or you can also take this in the other direction, just any developing impressions you have of Zach Hanson in his position. Now, I know that USC's inviting a 5-star recruit, but that's for 2026. And it's this weird in-between place here at USC football where everyone's going gaga over this 2026 class. But wait, we have a 2025 season first. And, it's important to, lead into 2026 on the right note. So everyone's talking about 2026, but for 2025, Ethan, just any developing thoughts either about the offensive line room or about the way Zach Hanson appears to be managing it at this early stage?
I think that when you hear about the offensive line room, you hear a lot of confidence coming from Lincoln Riley. I don't know how that should affect our perspective, the media's perspective, the fans' perspective, just because Lincoln Riley's obviously trotted out several subpar offensive line groups the last few years. And I think that there is a lot of confidence in the building just generally throughout the team. So I think that, if that confidence extends to the offensive line, that could be an encouraging sign, especially if that confidence is based in the same, because we know that there's other position groups that have made big strides that have kind of earned that confidence. So if the confidence is coming from the same place and is not just a front, I think that could be a positive development. I'm not sure. I would expect them to at least explore some offensive line pickups in the portal. I do think that one benefit of this upcoming season is that they're going to be competing a lot in practice with the kind of size that they're going to be seeing in the Big Ten. And that, a lot of USC's pickups this past portal season and this past recruiting season aren't necessarily the most polished, like guys like Jakeem Stewart and Jamal Jarrett. They're not guys who have a ton of college experience, a ton of stats in the stat sheet, but they are guys who have a lot of size. I've heard that they're kind of referred to as Big John, Little Jaw. And if you've ever seen Jakeem Stewart, it's funny that he would ever be called Little anything because he's huge. I mean, these are guys that are like 350 pounds. So even if they're not guys who are the most polished, I think that the offensive line is seeing a lot of the size that they're going to see in other Big Ten teams this season. And so I think that is going to prepare them better. But yeah, I think that while there are some guys like Tobias Raymond and other guys like that the staff seems to have some growing confidence in, I don't think that, if an opportunity comes along to recruit a guy who's a little bit more established, that they'll pass that up. So
just to address that point, I very much agree. I don't think you can look at USC's offensive line performance last season and then consider what's happened in the offseason, which is, not a whole lot, and say USC's all the way there. USC is exactly where it's supposed to be. USC has sufficient depth. I just don't think you can get from A to B in saying that USC has a fully filled out room, like it's table set, ready to eat. Not like USC's not there. I don't think it is. All right. We want your comments. We want your questions here at the Voice of College Football, our USC Coliseum Chronicle show. So, Corey Leith, thanks for your question. Do we need 2 linebackers if we have Jaden Walker? Well, let me just take a crack at that one before I pass it to you, Ethan. I don't think USC is in a position to be too choosy right now, right? I think USC is still in the building phase. Like, we're not coming off a college football playoff season. We're not coming off a 10-2, 11-1 season. I think USC is in a position where any extra leverage, any extra depth, any extra pieces help. Like, I don't think we can. Like, we want to be the big dog. We're not the big dog. So we need all of the reinforcements we can get. Ethan, your thoughts on the evolving linebacker room and Corey's question?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Corey. I think that Jaden Walker is somebody that Lincoln Riley's repeatedly said has been a bright spot this spring. I believe like last week, he said that he's been fantastic and one of the real bright spots of the spring, and that he'll play a big role on this team. But notice that he didn't say that he'd be a starter. He just said that he'll play a big role. So, it's a guy that seems like at this point he's growing, he's developing a lot. He's still a redshirt freshman, so he's still got room to grow, obviously, over the next 3 years of his college career. Hopefully, that all of them come in a Cardinal and gold uniform. But yeah, I think that beyond, Eric Gentry and Desmond Stevens, there's a lot of question marks. And I think that you also, while Eric Gentry and Desmond Stevens seem like starting caliber guys, you need depth, especially in college. And, things are going to happen like last year when Eric Gentry got hurt and was out for most of the year. He had a great couple of games, got injured, and then, he was out. And then you can turn to a guy like Jaden Walker. But again, it doesn't seem like, while it seems like Lincoln Riley is really happy with his growth, again, notice that he while he said that Jaden Walker is going to play a big role, he didn't say he was going to be a starter. And I think that a lot of times with Lincoln Riley, you have to do, since he's so positive and so supportive of his players, which, we can appreciate. We want him to hype up the players and to give them the most support that they can get. But he does a lot of, positive facing media. And so you have to read between the lines on some of these things. And, him saying that he's going to play a big role, but not a starter, that's a significant distinction. So we have to pay attention to things like that for sure. And so, yeah, I think that he's a depth piece, and you're going to need more pieces like him who can compete with him and can be ready to step in should Stevens or Eric Gentry go down, and in other packages as well. So,
yeah, Ethan, I think you hit on the main point. We all saw what happened when Eric Gentry got hurt last season, and football is a sport where injuries are going to happen. Like, this is part of the deal. Like, it's not some incredible act of God when a player gets hurt. It's football. Guys are going to be hurt. And the elite programs have that depth. They have guys ready to step in. The 2 is ready to perform when the 1 on the depth chart goes down. Like, this is the industry. This is how it's done. This is how it goes. So, like, that to me is the essential part of that particular conversation. All right. Could be Jamie, could be Jaime Perez. Thank you for the question here on the Coliseum Chronicles show at the Voice of College Football, our USC show. Do you think they need a wide receiver from the portal? All right, Ethan, I'm going to toss it to you. But first, my simple thought is, USC does need some depth behind Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. There's no question about that. But in terms of the hierarchy of needs, a little Maslow here, a little philosophy for you here at the Voice of College Football. And if there's a hierarchy of needs, offensive line is definitely number 1, especially since USC's fortified its defense at safety and linebacker in the portal. O-line is the thing. And just the point to reinforce about that, before we get to the receivers and before I toss it over to you, Ethan, is just that, remember, Miller Moss was not a bad quarterback, but he wasn't the Caleb Williams rock star, the guy who could just, put on the cape and pretty much do it himself, as we saw in 2022. When you don't have the rock star quarterback, when you don't have the elite, polished, complete product that Caleb Williams was, he needs help. So Jaden Mayava, like Miller Moss, is not the complete, fully finished product. Now, could he ripen into that over the course of the season? Sure he could, but he's not all there right now. And as we remember with the USC Michigan game last season, you throw Miller Moss, you throw a newer, younger, less proven quarterback into a hostile Big Ten road environment in Ann Arbor, to expect him to be letter perfect in that first really daunting Big Ten road game, not a realistic ask. And Miller Moss was not ready, but he didn't have nearly the pass protection and the overall line play in that Michigan game that he needed to be comfortable. And so if we basically put Jaden Maiava in 2025 on the same plane as Miller Moss 1 year ago, and I think it's fair to do that. I think they're pretty much in the same place in terms of development, live reps, overall experience, overall level of preparation for everything. They don't have zero preparation, but they're not fully finished, complete products. You need to give them as much help and as much quality on the offensive line as is possible. Now, people will make the point that, you need depth at wide receiver to help out your quarterback. Not going to argue that point, but just if you had to choose O-line or receiver in the portal, I know where I'm going. Ethan, wrestle with those same tension points I just talked about. Like what added nuance can you apply to all of this?
I think that I agree on the offensive line point. I think that I'd add that something we talked about last week a lot is Maiava's confidence and how that's going to factor a lot in his success. I think that anytime that you can make a quarterback like him that's less polished and has thrived in situations when he's been able to take a little bit more risks, some confidence and some comfortability, even if he is a guy that can be elusive, just helping him to feel comfortable, helping him to feel like he's not looking over his back shoulder all the time. That's beneficial, and that's only going to help him, going to help the team. I think that should be an emphasis for USC in the portal for sure. In terms of the wide receiver question, I think that there will be some exploration of for USC in terms of getting a receiver in the portal. I do think that Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane are two guys who are for real and can be the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers on this team. I also think that if healthy, Lake McCree is a guy who can take a good share of the wide receiver or of the receiving reps this year for sure. So it's not like you need a number 1 or number 2 or even really a number 3 guy per se. I think that Prince Strahan is also a guy kind of waiting in the wings that could turn out to be a really productive receiver for this team. He obviously is a transfer from Boise State. So I think that, but again, I think that beyond Lemon, beyond Lane, beyond Lake McCree, like if injuries come up and they have to go to the depth, it's a lot of unproven guys. So I think that you need guys who have a lot of potential, that can develop, that can learn under these guys. And that can step in if potentially some of these guys are injured. That's obviously not what we hope, but it's a reality that we have to plan for. But I don't think that getting a guy that's going to play ahead of these guys is necessarily a super big need. And I also think that wouldn't even be beneficial to their development. I think these are two guys in Lemon and Lane that can be superstars at the collegiate level. And I think that it would be beneficial, again, similar to what we talked about with Maiava, for Lincoln Riley to really instill some confidence in them. So I foresee them starting. I don't foresee them getting a guy that plays above those two guys, but I could see them getting some depth pieces for sure.
All right, I want to highlight some comments. Gerardo Zalata, longtime follower of the USC Voice of College Football channel. Hi, Gerardo, and thanks for your comment. Gerardo says, I feel quite confident with the additions and development in our defense, lines of scrimmage, receiver, running back, if the offensive line plays well. Are you confident the QBs have developed enough to win? Well, that's the thing, Gerardo, if the offensive line plays well. And I think really that invites the discussion. What is playing well mean? Like what playing well relative to, various moments last season, like the USC offensive line played well against Penn State for most of that game. Like if we see a standard laid down in that Penn State game or in the second half against Wisconsin, some other moments from last season, the fourth quarter against LSU, if that's the standard consistently throughout the season, okay. But, that last year's offensive line, it was not an awful offensive line, but the standard needed to be really high. The bar needed to be set very high because Miller Moss was, again, not a fully finished product. The offensive line needed to perform at an A- level for everything to come together on a regular basis. It had its moments, that offense and that offensive line. They had their moments last season. Penn State, Wisconsin, LSU were really, really good in spots. But over the full 12 games, that level of play vacillated. And we often would see the offensive line play terrible for like 20 minutes and then great for 20 minutes and then regress to average for another 20 minutes. Like, the offensive line was really good for a good 20, 25-minute chunk of a game, and it was really bad in another 20, 25 minutes. So just the inconsistency of that offensive line just was not where USC needed it. Like, if you were to grade that offensive line over the entire 2024 season, I came down on C+, B-. Again, that's not awful, but it needed to be a lot better to put Miller Moss in the best position to succeed. And I would apply that same basic standard to Jaden Maiava. So, Gerardo, that's basically where I come down on that. And Ethan, I'm going to get your reaction to that. But also, we have our friend Will ND asking about which running backs are going to be getting most of the first team reps. I've put Gerardo's and Will's comments together. Gerardo about the offensive line and the quarterbacks, and then Will about the running backs, because that kind of throws everything together in the pot. The O-line, the quarterbacks, the running backs, and that leads me, Ethan, to this basic question. Lincoln Riley's play calling a year ago, we know it wasn't good. We know it didn't hit the sweet spot. We know that was a real sore spot for a lot of USC fans, and legitimately so. Like, Lincoln Riley missed the mark. It was his worst year as a play caller. He's been one of the best play callers in the business, but last year he didn't have his fastball. And so my question, Ethan, centered around and related to these questions about O-line, QB, running back. Do we sense a possible philosophical change this season with Jaden Maiava? And I say that for a lot of reasons, but chiefly when Lincoln Riley got his hands on Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma, he didn't insist that Jalen Hurts be a downfield passer, a gunslinger. He had Jalen Hurts running the ball at Oklahoma. Now, a lot of people are going to step in and say, okay, Matt, that Oklahoma offensive line in 2019 was really, really good. Much better than anything USC has done. But that said, because Lincoln Riley does have more of a running quarterback, Ethan, do you think we're going to see, and I know it's several months out, but hey, it's the off season. Like, this is the kind of meat and potatoes topic we should be talking about for our USC fan base here at the Voice of College Football. Do you think we're going to see Lincoln Riley not just emphasize the running game, but emphasize Jaden Maiava as a running quarterback and really lean on that part? Maybe not the whole season, but certainly in September, early on, so that it kind of takes pressure off the passing game. It takes pressure off offensive linemen to have to be, just kind of on their heels in pass protection all the time. And if you kind of reshape the identity, set a different tone for the offense, also perhaps create more of a ball control style offense with fewer snaps per game. So that means you're not putting the burden as much on any part of the team. Shortening games, fewer snaps, not expecting everyone to have to produce at quite an elite level right off the bat, and you can maybe ease into that as we get into October and November. So, Ethan, I've thrown a lot at you, but I also made that, highlighted those comments to kind of illustrate that this much larger picture in terms of how Lincoln Riley attacks 2025 as a play caller. I know you've been thinking about this, so taking all of that together, what's your basic response?
Well, you and I are on the same page, Matt, because I was also going to bring up play calling. to attack both of these questions. I think that one of the few things that we have left to fully trust Lincoln Riley about is quarterback development. I have almost zero doubt that Jaden Mayava will be a better quarterback in 2025 than he was in 2024. And I think that, he's not missing the fact that he didn't get Mayava's legs as involved as he could have. I think that is, it would be crazy to say that he at least doesn't see it. Whether he wants to make a big effort to make that change is a different story, but he obviously sees that he didn't involve Mayava's legs as much as he could have, especially with that weapon at his disposal, and with Mayava making plays like he did against Utah State. And, that was obviously a garbage time play, but it was still an exciting one that had the internet kind of buzzing and, saying, is Caleb Williams back, and all that stuff. So, we know that he has the capability to do it, and Lincoln knows he has the capability to do it. I think that I certainly hope so, is all I will say. I think that this, in terms of the running backs, I'll get to Will's question. I do think that the running back room is something that's had a lot of buzz around camp. I think that Lincoln Riley is really excited about these running backs. All that he seems to say about the running backs is very positive, and that all of them are competing, and that all of them have the potential to play in a lot of these games. And I think that, that kind of tracks, because they all seem like guys who would be really hungry. Wayman Jordan is the guy they got from community college, and he was the 2024 NJCAA Division I Football Offensive Player of the Year, which is like basically the Heisman for JUCOs. So he's a guy who has had success. Granted it's JUCO and not D1, but he's going to be out hungry and out to prove that he can have that same success at this level. Eli Sanders is a guy with a lot of experience. Obviously, it's at a smaller, like Mountain West level school, but it's a guy that still has a lot of that collegiate experience, still has a lot of that D1 experience, and again is going to be hungry that he can play at a Big Ten school and he can play at the same level. And then Brian Jackson is a guy who got a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be the number one back in that bowl game, and had a decent amount of success. So he's a guy that's also going to be hungry. I think that there is a legitimate competition there. I don't think that any guy is a super front runner right now. I would kind of lean towards Wayman Jordan just based on the buzz that I've heard out of camp at this point. But I think that could change. I think that, the same guy who starts week 1 may not be the same guy who's starting by the end of the year. And I don't think that that'll be because the guy in the driver's seat struggles per se. I think that that's just because they've got 3 guys who are dynamic and who are hungry and that can compete at this level. And I just really hope that Lincoln Riley utilizes that kind of wealth of weapons at his disposal, because this is something that I talked about again on last pod that I've been frustrated with for the past several years. Is Travis Dye was a great running back. Obviously, that was a year where they had a lot of offensive success, so you can't really, you're being a little nitpicky saying that Travis Dye wasn't as involved. But the last 2 years, especially with Marshawn Lloyd, we know he had his fumbling issues, but when he got the ball and could hold on to the ball, he was a really dynamic runner. And this past year, it was the most egregious because Woody Marks was the best running back in the Big Ten, basically. And Miller Moss was not Caleb Williams. So it makes a little bit of sense for Lincoln to kind of struggle to take the ball out of Caleb's hands, just given that Caleb was coming off of his Heisman year. But with Miller, you were just really hoping to see the run game established a bit more. But I do think that comes down to somewhat the offensive line. I think it also comes down to, whatever Lincoln decides, just like sticking to his guns and like trying, if he wants to establish the run, try to establish the run. Obviously not to a point where it's, you're losing a football game over trying to establish the run, but not giving up on these backs, giving them every chance to prove themselves, and giving Mayava every chance to prove that he can do it with his legs as well and make those dynamic plays. So yeah, I certainly hope that that's something that we see. I hope that we see, more read option looks and stuff like that, but because that's things that could tear up some of these Big Ten defenses for sure and take a little bit of pressure off of the O-line, like you said, Matt. But I don't know. I feel like I can't definitively say, but I certainly hope so.
Yeah, just to reflect a little bit on last season with Maava, like we saw in the Nebraska game and also the Notre Dame game, that Maava's speed, his legs were a real weapon, and that was something Miller Moss wasn't able to bring to the table. Like we knew Miller Moss was chained to the pocket. He's a 7-step drop back guy. That's not even a criticism. That's just who he is. He's a drop back passer. We knew that. Jaden Maava brought some extra components to the field, and it just seems like that's a natural added element that if you have it, you use it. Like it's a waste of Jaden Maava's talent to just have him be a drop back passer. You want to use him in the running game. Now people will say, well, he might get hurt, and that invites a question about Husan Longstreet and whether he's going to be ready and available to be a legitimate backup, ready to step in as we go along. But Ethan, you and I are very much in agreement. There's a running game component, an extra element that can throw a curveball to opposing defenses with Jaden Maava. Lincoln Riley has to use that in order to get the most out of this USC offense in 2025. More on play calling, since like this is a good off-season topic. Like we don't have to do the scouting report on any Big Ten opponent. We're not in the fall, but like in the off season, play calling is a good sports bar type topic to lean into. And so, even in terms of following up in the realm of play calling, I think one of the things that was tricky for Lincoln Riley to handle last season at USC is that the offensive line was not great, but the offensive line had those 20-minute segments, I should say, when it was really good. And there were times when Lincoln Riley seemed to be riding the wave, but he didn't ride the wave consistently enough in those pockets of time when the offensive line was just rearing back and blasting open holes. One of the things I remember noting about the offensive line and about the running game in live action last season, Ethan, was that one running play would get 0 yards, the next running play would get 10. So the average was 5.5 yards a carry, but it was imbalanced. Like it's not as though USC was getting 4, 5, 4, 5 every single time. It was a 1, it was a 10, it was a 0, it was a 9. And I think Lincoln Riley was not willing to run the ball on 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9. If a running play got stopped on 1st and 10, he would then throw on 2nd down. And so the play calling question I have for you is, does Lincoln Riley need to be willing to run the ball more on 2nd and long this season? Did you identify any other patterns with his use of the running game relative to the down? Because like in the NFL, it's a pretty popular thing to criticize coaches who go run, pass. Run on 1st, run on 2nd, you get in the 3rd and medium or long, and you punt. But at USC, maybe that's something Lincoln Riley has to do more of, running on 1st down and 2nd down, not abandoning the run if the 1st down running play gets bottled up. I know that Woody Marks is not on this roster this season, so maybe the dynamic with the running back room is a little bit different. You mentioned that he was arguably the best running back in the Big Ten, and Lincoln Riley clearly did not lean on him to the extent that he should have. Like that's a unanimous point of agreement among the USC fan base, the USC community. But in terms of the philosophy of play calling as it relates to the running game, if you get stopped on 1st and 10, did Lincoln Riley not trust the running game on 2nd and long nearly enough? How do you? Let's just go into your philosophy, Ethan. What's your philosophy in terms of 1st down, 2nd down? How you set up 10-yard sequences, going back to the well instead of abandoning it. What's your philosophy in terms of just play calling mixture?
Yeah, I think that to your point about run game patterns that I noticed, I think it was especially apparent in the red zone. Like the UCLA game is one game in particular that I can remember where USC would have these offensive drives that were going really well, and then they'd get into the red zone and like throw 3 balls and then kick a field goal, or I don't and it had me like, because I was at the Rose Bowl at that game, just like head in my hands in the press box, because I was like, we're not going to try to run. We're like 5 yards out of the end zone. We're not going to try to run at least once. Like, you'd think 5 yards out, it would be twice, but at least once. So I think that in the red zone was one place where it especially stuck out, that they had seemingly a hesitancy to commit to the run, which I don't really understand. But I think that it is something that you could see Lincoln going to a little bit more. And again, I would hope that he would go to a little bit more, just because of there being more weapons available to him. It feels like more of a backfield where there's not a clear number one guy. Like, when we just talked about and previewed the running back room a couple of minutes ago, I hesitated to commit to one guy as the clear starter, because I don't think that there is one per se. I think that, again, if I had to guess right now, it would be Wayman Jordan, but I'm not entirely sure. So I think that, there's not one guy with a clear head above the others. So I would think that all three of the guys are going to get a lot of touches. And so you could cycle them in and out so that, you're not making a guy like Woody Marks touch the ball 20 or 30 times a game. You can have, one of the guys get 15 touches and then another guy get 10 and another guy get 5, and based on whatever the pecking order turns out to be, and that'll take some of the weight off and allow you to run the ball more without necessarily wearing some of the guys out. Because I think that that's something that I also noticed a lot last year. Is Quentin Joyner was obviously a guy who had a lot of natural talent and was a real dynamic runner, and a guy that seemed like he could compete in these games at a Big Ten level. You would have thought that he would have gotten more touches, but that's not what ended up happening, obviously. So I think that cycling through the running back room more, trusting some of those other guys, I think that he has more incentive to do that this year. And then again, with Mayava has the legs. So I think that Lincoln likes to get creative. So it may not be, like a run between the tackles from the number one running back on first and second down, but I would hope that even if he wants to keep mixing it up, you get some read options in there, have Mayava, running the ball a little bit on second down, maybe cycle in, like, let's say Wayman Jordan's the starter. He runs for 5 yards. You have, Eli Sanders come in and try to get the next 5. Maybe you try to get Mekhi Lemon involved in the running game a little bit, throw like a pitch or a swing pass and try to, just swing it out wide so he can get some yards with an easy short pitch like that. Like, I think that he has the weapons this year and not a clear number one guy to where the wealth can really be spread. And like I said, these guys are hungry. So I expect them to take every down that they get and compete to the fullest of their ability, and compete with pride that they're in a Cardinal and gold uniform this year, and that, their efforts at other smaller schools have been rewarded with this opportunity to play at a Big Ten school, one of the best historic college football programs, at one of the best stadiums and one of the most historic stadiums, and just to, take advantage of that opportunity and compete, and to all get in and hopefully all share the wealth here. So I think that this roster is the most conducive in the Lincoln Riley era to running the ball more in that sense. I think that, again, it's hard to say in the offseason. We haven't seen any of these guys play yet, and we haven't seen how the offensive line is going to hold up in run kind of formations and run packages and stuff like that. So, I think I would certainly hope so, and I think that there is a great possibility considering just the way that the roster is structured this year.
Comment from Trojan Fight. Thank you for the comment. I'd also like to see them use more of a variety of formations. Shotgun and 4 wide receivers over and over isn't exactly favorable for running the ball. Historical perspective on your comment, Trojan Fight, and we've had other people in the comments also saying, more jumbo packages, more different packages. But here's the historical comment to make about something involving USC. Now, it was not something USC did. It was something a USC opponent did. But 1971, Alabama under Bear Bryant, which was really, really strong in the early and mid 1960s, fell on hard times 1968 through 1970. We remember USC, John McKay, Sam Bam Cunningham going into Birmingham, thrashing Alabama in 1970, that celebrated game. So Alabama was limping into 1971. Bear Bryant was struggling. He needed to freshen up his program. He needed to hit the reset button. What does he do? In the offseason, before the 1971 college football season, He went to his buddy Darrell Royal, the coach of Texas, which won the 1969 national title, was right there in the title hunt in 1970 as well. Bear Bryant learned the wishbone from his friend Darrell Royal, and Alabama comes out to the Coliseum in 71. Again, they played in 1970, so USC had no idea that Alabama was doing this. It was like, metaphor alert, a Trojan horse. USC completely surprised by Alabama's wishbone. Alabama wins that game in 1971 in the Coliseum. And Bear Bryant basically reinvents himself, and he started the next great chapter of his career. Alabama dominated for much of the 1970s, though USC kicked Alabama's butt in 1978, won the national title. But anyway, doing something different. That's the point. That's the historical callback. Like Lincoln Riley springing the wishbone. Like wouldn't that be a curveball for opposing teams? Why not? You have struggled. If you're Lincoln Riley, you've struggled to be on top of the Big Ten, on top of the college football world. Be ambitious. It's not as though you have to run the wishbone the whole game, but a few plays in a few specific situations when the defense isn't expecting it, like that could really leverage some situations, get some big plays in some big moments. So that's the historical callback that I wanted to bring in here. Even as we transition toward the final segment of our show, it is the NFL draft in Green Bay. And there are a couple of Trojans that are on our radar screen. And one is a player we've talked about already, Woody Marks. So he's going to take the spotlight. There's also Jonah Monheim. There's also Jalen Smith. Your thoughts on, start with Woody Marks, but then on the other USC Trojans who could get drafted, anything about them that people should be watching for as the draft unfolds from Green Bay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think real quickly to your point about formations, I just wanted to throw out there that, this is obviously a really talented tight end room. And Lake McCree is a guy who I feel has been a little underutilized, and I would like to see him utilized more. And then obviously, like if you want to have a two tight end formation, like Walker Lyons is a guy that, had a lot of playing time last year, given that Lake McCree was out for a good while. And he's a guy that you kind of want to keep happy, especially if you want to bring his brother around in the next couple of years or so. But anyways, yes, forward to the NFL draft. Like you said, Woody Marks is obviously the top prospect for USC. He's projected to be about a fifth rounder according to ESPN. But yeah, Monheim and then Jalen Smith are two guys that are obviously also on NFL teams' rosters, at least in the draft phase of things. We'll likely see some other USC guys, get signed as undrafted free agents. But those are the three guys that I would expect to be taken. Monheim and Smith are more seventh round guys. But yeah, I think that there's reason to be excited about each of their prospects in the NFL. I think that Woody Marks came into this program already a very dynamic, very kind of well-rounded running back, and only like further established his reputation at USC. Again, he was one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, and displayed a very pro-ready game. So I think that he's a guy who is not only going to get drafted, but should compete for touches in the NFL. And then the other two guys, I mean, they're USC diehards. So I'm certainly happy for them. I'll certainly be rooting for them. Jalen Smith in particular is a guy who I've been around a lot covering the football team, and he's, just always a beacon of energy, a beacon of positivity. He has a really infectious smile. So I'm really excited for him. He loves football. He loves USC, grew up here, grew up a USC fan. And he gave a lot to this program and really grew a lot. He was a guy who didn't have a big role when he first came, and then turned into one of the best players on this defense. So just kind of really proud of his growth from that perspective as a guy who's kind of watched him, take on that journey. And I wish him the best for sure. I'm always rooting for him. So yeah, I think that those three guys are guys that you could reasonably expect. It probably won't be too much movement on the USC front for the first 2 days of the draft, but those three guys are guys to watch out for on day 3 for sure. And yeah, it should be a celebratory day for USC football fans. All three of those guys are widely beloved around this campus and this program, and so I think USC's fans are really looking forward to seeing those guys taken.
All right, and because it's NFL Draft Week, we also have to, and you mentioned beloved Trojans, and those guys are. Let's talk about another beloved Trojan, Pete Carroll, entering his NFL draft with the Las Vegas Raiders. And boy, Ethan, I mean, you're at USC. Just imagine being a USC student in that classroom. Professor Pete Carroll bringing in Tom Brady over Zoom as a guest, and Juju Watkins is a student asking a question to Tom Brady about his ACL recovery in 2008. Oh, to be a USC student in that particular classroom, in that particular moment. Just hard to wrap the mind around all of that. But Pete Carroll and Tom Brady, like, they're all in with the Raiders. Like, Tom Brady being as part of the Raiders ownership group, like, that lent the Raiders the credibility to give Pete Carroll the push to come back to NFL head coaching. So your thoughts on Pete Carroll and the Raiders draft? What do you think they might do at number 6? Now, are they going to take either which player they're going to take, or are they going to trade down for more picks? Like, if another team wants a quarterback at 6, Raiders could trade down, get more pieces. The Raiders also have the number 37 pick, where they could maybe get a project level quarterback, and maybe which guy might be there on the board at 37. Your overall impressions about this draft and what you're looking forward to with Pete Carroll and the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, you mentioned that class. It's funny you mentioned it. It's a class that I have a lot of friends in, and so I hear all the buzz every week. It's a class that's had, guys like Jason Sudeikis come in. I believe Steve Kerr came in. I think also remotely, not in person, but Lindsey Gottlieb's been in. Juju Watkins is obviously a student in the class. I believe Jakeem Stewart is also a student in the class. And it's really a credit to Professor David Belasco, who is a business professor at USC. I took one of his classes last semester, actually, that he co-taught with Cheryl Miller. And that class also had a lot of really cool guests. We had Juju and Coach Gottlieb also come in for the last class of the year for the kind of final panel of the semester. So that was really cool. And a couple other, kind of big name guests as well. Jameel Hill was one of them. So Belasco is a guy with connections, and he's a guy that's always kind of trailblazing with these classes. And he kind of told us about Pete Carroll also came in via Zoom to kind of announce the class and get people excited about it. So Belasco's always got his hands kind of mixed up in trailblazing USC classes. So it's a credit to his influence and his connections for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's been great to have him around. It's something that, he's really been able to connect with a new generation of USC fans and USC students, I think, who, may not have been as big into, I'd certainly hope that some of my fellow students were paying attention when Pete Carroll was head coach at USC, but, not all of them were. So I think that it's helping him connect with the new generation. And yeah, once in a lifetime opportunity for sure. I'm really happy for some of my friends. One of my friends in particular, and my former roommate, was is a massive Tom Brady fan, and watched kind of countless Bucs games with him, and so to kind of a dream come true for him to have a class with Tom Brady. So kind of amazing. And it was funny too to watch the videos that came out of that class, because Pete Carroll made a joke about Tom Brady being his boss, and I thought that was just hilarious. It's so weird to think that Tom Brady is 30 years the junior of Pete Carroll, and he's Pete Carroll's boss. What a crazy kind of football world that we live in these days. But yeah, in terms of, that was a really long-winded talk about the class, but in terms of,
and it was great. Thank you. Yeah, we love that.
A little bit of the campus insight. I am still
here.
But I think if the Raiders stay at 1, they're picking round 1 at number 6. I think that there's a few different directions that they could go. I don't think that there's going to be a real proven quarterback available there. So, I could see them more likely picking a guy in round 2, kind of like you said, if they go quarterback at one of the top 2 rounds. A lot of mocks that I've seen have them going offensive line and going for someone like Armand Membu from Missouri. But I'm not sure. I think that it would be really cool to see Pete Carroll take one of these USC guys in one of the later rounds, like taking a Woody Marks in around 5, or like a Jalen Smith in around 7. I think that the Raiders official website has actually Jalen Smith going to the Raiders in round 6, pick 180, in that mock that was done by Raiders insider Rhett Lewis. So it's certainly possible. It would be a really cool connection, and I think it'd be one that Jalen Smith would certainly be really excited about, because he's a big USC guy, like we mentioned. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. Maybe a guy like Jackson Dart's available. He seemed to like kind of shoot up the draft board, so it's not entirely likely. There's obviously a bit of a kind of a USC connection there. It's a little bit of a sore subject, given that he left so much.
He wasn't here for long, but he was here. Let's talk a little bit more about Jackson Dart. Last year, just for context, and people were aware, but let's just kind of mention it to kind of shape the scene. Michael Penix going at number 8, that blew everybody away. Bo Nix going at 12 blew everybody away. No one was predicting that those quarterbacks would go off the board so early, and there seems to be this late freight train of momentum, not just for Jackson Dart, but also for Jalen Milroe as well, and Shedeur Sanders. With all of the gossip surrounding him, it seems as though his stock is falling. That just invites a question about how legit you think Jackson Dart is as an NFL prospect. I gotta say, I see some raw talent and material that can be made into something, but man, his decisions were not very good. Like, I watched that Ole Miss Florida game. He just kept throwing passes into territory, like into traffic. He was just continuously inviting trouble. Man, I just need to see more of a football IQ from Jackson Dart. Like, he's athletic, he's gifted, like he has the raw tools and makings in many ways, like Jalen Milroe. Now Milroe is an even better physical specimen and runner, but there is the commonality that there is raw material with these guys, but the football IQ just does not seem to me to be where it needs to be. But of course, if you're the Raiders, you could say, hey, we're paying Chip Kelly all this money to be offensive coordinator. Chip, earn your pay. Coach Jackson Dart. That could be the thought process. But how do you evaluate Jackson Dart in amidst all these tension points?
I think that Jackson Dart is a guy who I was initially very excited about. When, I think in the mess that was the first Clay Helton season, there was a brief moment where it seemed like the season may be saved after Keaton Slovis went down against Washington State, and he kind of stepped in and had basically the best first game that you can ask for out of a guy like that. But then obviously the whole situation with that was a mess. They were playing 2 quarterbacks, and neither of them were playing super well. And then, obviously Caleb Williams comes in, and Jackson Dart's a guy who's, shown that he has the talent to start, but is not going to start over a guy like Caleb Williams, who's a Heisman level quarterback. So I think that he's he's a guy that I certainly am really rooting for. He seems like he would, if he does have success, he's going to be a real marketable guy. He was a guy with kind of a good personality and demeanor. I was always a fan of the kind of one strip of eye black. I remember him saying in a press conference way back in my freshman year that it's because he's a big Star Wars fan and it looks like Anakin Skywalker's scar. Saw another graphic about that today, and I was like, oh, a little full circle moment. I remember him saying that freshman year when he was still here. But so, he's a guy who I think that fans will really connect with, and that, might be appealing to some of these franchises that, like you said, are hearing, question marks about the character of a guy like Shedeur Sanders. I don't know. I think it's definitely reasonably possible that he gets taken late first round. Maybe you see the Raiders trading up into the late first round from 37th pick to, try to get him there. But if not, I think if he's a guy, if he's available at like 29 to the Giants, especially if the Giants don't, figure out a young quarterback to take before then, I think that he's a guy who is not polished. You mentioned he's lost Ole Miss some games that they should have won, but he's also gone out there and, had Ole Miss competitive and winning some games that, people didn't expect them to win. So I think that he's a guy who's shown enough and is a guy who, again, just kind of inspires belief and would be really exciting for a fan base if he does well. And if he's available at a spot like 29, I think he might be too good to pass up for the Giants in that spot.
And it'll be interesting to see, which quarterbacks are still on the board at various points in the draft, whether it's 29, 37, whatever. We know the Steelers are going with a quarterback at 21. That seems like a pretty safe call. Just, briefly addressing Pete Carroll and the Raiders, my opinion is they should trade down from number 6. I think that, the Raiders are in a position where they need more bodies. They need more depth. So I think that accumulating more picks, more pieces, and not trying to go all in on a top 10 pick. If the Raiders had the number 1 or number 2 pick, different deal. But at number 6, I just don't see it. I think that you invite a trade down with another team that wants to go up, jump up to number 6, get a quarterback. That's my recommendation for Pete. But of course, he knows what he's doing, and I'm definitely pulling for him with the Raiders. And I write at Trojans Wire. We're part of the College Wire Network, but we have our various NFL Wire partner sites. You want to follow Raiders Wire for complete coverage of Pete Carroll's first NFL draft with the Raiders. The editor, Levi Damien, does a great job covering that team. We're always linking to Raiders Wire stories to give you coverage of Pete Carroll. We're all interested in what he's doing, and he's not way up in the Northwest anymore. He's now much closer to USC, based in Las Vegas, with the Raiders. Ethan Inman, closing down the shop. Before we go, just any final USC thoughts, news, or notes for the week that we've just had, or the week to come? Any last items in your USC football notebook?
Not necessarily in my USC football notebook, Matt, but I did want to shout out the LA Kings. They're playing, I believe, right now. Go Kings, big Kings guy. Big win they got, in game 1 a couple nights ago. Obviously a little scary. They let the Oilers come back a little bit, but big Kings guy and big not Oilers guy. So yeah, pulling for them, hoping that they make a run. They've been really fun to watch this season. I've done a little bit of coverage of them as well. So really excited about them, and make sure you tune into the Kings. Hockey in LA is great. It needs to keep growing because it's a great sport, and it's something that could take off in LA. So go Kings. I
just got to say, we need to bring back the purple and gold LA Kings sweaters. I mean, black. It's just so lacking in imagination. Give back the purple and gold. And, when the Oilers were making that comeback, a lot of people were talking about the miracle on Manchester, which was the Kings' massive comeback against the Oilers 40 some odd years ago. The Oilers almost reversed that, but not quite. So go Kings, go. Is the battle cry in Los Angeles. So, hey, you want your hockey, you go to Ethan Inman for that. All right, folks. So another week for USC Trojans here at the Voice of College Football. Thanks for joining us. Mark Rogers should be back with us next week. But hey, there's another announcement to make. The Voice of College Football, all right, new venture, all right. The Voice of College Football is debuting a written website. So, you get these podcasts. We're at the USC channel, the Michigan channel, the Ohio State channel, channels all across the Big Ten, all across the country, all across the SEC. But there's going to be a written website. You're going to get written articles from a team of writers at the Voice of College Football. That unveiling is going to happen very soon. So you want to pay attention to Mark Rogers. You want to pay attention to all of the individual shows, because these shows, whether it's USC, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, anything, we're going to be developing our written content that we're going to promote here on our broadcast. So stay tuned for the big reveal, the big unveiling of the Voice of College Football website with news articles, opinion, commentary, and analysis on your favorite sport and ours, college football. Thanks for watching USC Trojans Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. For Ethan Inman, I'm Matt Zemek. We're going to see you next week.